of what this means, but the name that they wanted me to share, and I swear I didn't make this up, this just came to me, it's called the Sasquatch way of life. And the Sasquatch way of life is through different experiences throughout my life of following my guidance system to create, to become the best person that you can be, to really bring your magic and medicine to the planet. So anyways, that's I'm just going to get right into it, I guess. So in a lot of these stories, especially as I get a little bit farther, there's going to be some different teachings that come from. So my first ever experience with the paranormal and what I learned to be Sasquatch was when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I was just a little child living in Richmond, BC, and we had a 2-story house, and I was always in nature. I loved nature. I was always in the backyard. The other kids were playing soccer and stuff, and I was playing with the bugs and the slugs and the spiders, and I had a really deep connection to nature. So I was laying in bed on the 2nd story of the house, in my bedroom, and I had the most clearest telepathic message I've ever got came to me, and it said, "Eric, come to the window quick, we're here." And with that mind speak, I've never got so clear mind speak in my life. With that mind speak came a feeling of family that I can't even really express the feeling of family. So if you talk about your mother or your father or your children and you have that feeling that comes with it, if you could amplify that by hundreds, that's the feeling that came with this telepathy. So not only mind speak, but a very big sense of family and brotherhood. So I ran to the window and I jumped out the window, and I looked, and as 2 basketball-sized orange orbs were floating about this high in the backyard, and they floated right underneath my window. They merged into one ball, and they slowly floated across the yard and through the fence and just disappeared. And I was like, wow, I was amazed by it, and I've never experienced anything like that. So I told my mom, obviously what's a boy to do, right? I wanted to share it, so I told my mom the story. And what could she do? She's like, okay, thanks for sharing that story. So she supported me in that story, and it was a really interesting. It was amazing. So I had no idea what it was. I was like, just these big balls of these big orange balls of light, and they were talking to me. So as I still lived in Richmond, I started to get these understandings and these deep knowings, and I also believe that they were just reawakening the remembrance within me. So as a child, I would be playing with my kids, and I would get these downloads of information, and a few of the things that really stuck out to me was, one that I knew very, very clearly was what we do in this life. So it was pertaining to me, but I also pertain this to everybody. So one of the teachings was, what I do in this life, now this goes to everybody, what I do in this life is super important. It is going to have an effect on the collective. So every choice I make, every thought that I have it affects everything. It's a ripple effect across the whole planet. And I don't know where these came from, but I believe they just came from my deeper understanding as a child. So that pertains to everybody. What every one of us does, as everybody else is speaking, we're so much more powerful than we understand. So that was one of the main things, and the other one actually just kind of slipped my mind. So not too long after that, I was also a fisherman at that age, and I love fishing. So me and my friend, we would take our bikes to the Fraser River, and we would fish off the dike. So we're out there, we got our lines casted out, and we're fishing, and we got our lines just sitting in the water, and all of a sudden this thing appeared out of the water, like I would say about here to that wall away, a little bit closer, and it turns out to be these big large humps coming through the water like this. Multiple humps turn out to be this big long creature swimming through the water just on the outside of our fishing lines in the water. And it was a huge water serpent of some sort, and it was amazing. And both of us were freaked right out, and we reeled our lines in, and we drove home, and we split when we had to go to each home, and I ran home, and again, I tell my mom, I'm like, Mom, this big, massive creature came out of the water, and it had multiple humps at once, and I would guess it was this round, and it was super long. Like, it wasn't a sturgeon, you know. It wasn't a sturgeon, and so you actually, just to push that forward, my friend, when we moved back to Edmonton, I was born in Edmonton, just to let you know, we moved to Richmond for a little while. So I moved back to Edmonton, and in my teens, or in my 20s actually, my friend ended up becoming a helicopter pilot. He was fighting fires all over, and he was also a very well experienced steelhead fisherman, fly fisherman, so he's experienced in coastal fishing a lot. So anyways, he came through Alberta one day and stopped over for the night, and he opened his car door, and the first thing he said, he came out, we hadn't talked for years, and he said, "Hey, do you remember that creature we've seen in the water, you know?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man, I'm so happy you remember it." So that was just another confirmation, you know, that, you know, we've seen this amazing creature now. So this was kind of a theme in my life of seeing these weird, I was having these weird experiences. So I can't say why I have had many, many mystical and hard to explain experiences. So I moved back to Edmonton, and there's been a big phase in my life where I kind of detached from seeing those experiences, and I just went on kind of the normal day-to-day life as a child, and you know, growing up, and I kind of didn't have those experiences. But what started happening was, in my dream time, I would be gone. So I would just be sleeping, and then I would gain consciousness coming back down at about the clouds, and it started happening at a very, very young age, and I had no idea where I was going, but I would gain consciousness at the clouds, and I had no control at first, and I would come back and hit my body so hard, and I would just go, and I would just smash into my body. And it actually took until I got into my 20s to understand. Well, I think I understood that I was astral projecting before that, but it took me until I was in my 20s to learn how to control coming back down to earth. So I still don't know where I was going, but I believe that I was always taken up to work. My teams were working with me, is what I gather from that, and I don't have any recall of where I would go, but so I learned how to. So eventually, actually, I would work in the oil field up in northern Alberta, and one time in camp, when it really hit me the hardest, we were staying in these little camp shacks, you know, these little shacks, and I'm laying on my bed, and it came into my body so hard one night, it hit me so hard, I blasted out of bed, and I landed on the floor, and I woke my neighbor up. Like, that's how hard, I guess, my spirit is coming back into my body. So I eventually learned how to fly. So maybe the next time, or not too long after that, I started coming down, and I learned how to control my trajectory down, and I would glide in this kind of emotion, and I would glide into my body. So then it became fun, because I still didn't know where I was going, but now I'm able to come back, and that kind of triggered dreaming, like for me to research dreaming and learn about what do you call it when you are aware of your dreams? Lucid dreaming. That brought me to studying lucid dreaming and doing some of those exercises, and then I became very lucid in my dreams, and flying was so natural to me. I actually became a dream guide, and I would go and meet my family and friends in my dreams, and I would teach them how to fly. And even to this day, I fly in my dreams, and when I wake up, sometimes I still believe that I can fly as a human, and I know in this moment right now I can't jump off this roof and fly, but I don't know, it's so hard to explain, but it's within us. Like, we have these abilities. I believe that I can fly. A I woke up the other day and I actually went out to the farm and I was talking to my mom and I said, Mom, can I fly? she said, no, Eric, that's only in your dreams. And I'm like, no, I believe I can fly. So that's just a little preface into some of my my dreams and stuff. So anyways, getting back to the Sasquatch. So my parents ended up buying a farm in Alberta, and I was in grade 5 when they bought the farm. So I moved out to the farm, and I was always really connected to nature. And we grew up in a hunting family. My dad always took us bird hunting, and my brother started bow hunting at a young age. So when I was 11, that's when you can legally bow hunt in Alberta. So naturally, I took that on, and because I had such a great connection with nature and stuff, the hunting came very simply to me. The skill of getting close to animals, and I actually excelled fairly quickly at becoming a fairly successful archery hunter. And my brother is 3 or 4 years older than me, and they would always take me hunting, and they would go years without getting anything. And right off the bat, I started harvesting game with my bow. And I don't know, but so I started bow hunting, and then as I got a little bit older, into my 16, 17, 18, I started taking trips up into the mountains, and with my friends or by myself. And then this is where I started having experiences where I'd be walking through these valleys and hunting, and then I would hear, it started with tree knocks, and I would just be walking down the valley, and like 150 yards in front of me, I'd just hear whap, I'd hear a tree knock. I'm like, okay, at first I had no idea what it was. So I'm like, okay, interesting. And at this point I actually started guiding at the age of 17, so I was very aware of tracks and animals and up close. I was very aware of the wilderness, and I'm walking up there, and I'm like, okay, that tree knock is about 100 yards up there. So I would walk up there, and there'd be no sign. And it's in rutting season, so often the moose will leave a scent behind if it's a rutting bull moose and he's whacking the horns or something. And I'm walking up, and there was no tracks, there's no nothing. And I'm like, weird. So then another like 30, 40 yards in front of me, I'd hear these tree knocks again. So I went for years of hearing these tree knocks in the forest and not really understanding what they were. And then I would talk to people about them, and they said, oh, they're just moose. They're moose knocking their antlers on the trees. And I'm like, they're not moose. I know what moose are. I've heard moose knock there. I've heard moose in the forest lots, especially bow hunting in the rut. A lot of up close and, personal encounters with them. So then I started, and I always had Sasquatch on my mind, and then I was doing some research, and I heard that these tree knocks, that Sasquatch do tree knocks. So I asked, one day I brought it up to my bosses, and I said, I think some of these tree knocks that I'm hearing are Sasquatch, and they laughed at me. They said, hey, Sasquatch, you're crazy, man. So this has kind of been a theme in my life, growing up in rural Alberta, farmland, oil country. Men, I say, I was a younger man, but men kind of have this stigma, It was hard for me to really be who I was, because there's a persona that's kind of wrapped around being a country boy, and being in the heart and loving and being spiritual and having mystical experiences didn't really fit with that. So I kind of hid that stuff for quite a few years. So I kept having these experiences, and I knew that they were Sasquatch, and I knew that I was having these experiences with Sasquatch. Along with this, I had a very deep, I grew up, my parents kind of raised me religious in a Christian setting, and I would go to Sunday school, and it didn't take me long, like maybe, I wasn't much taller than this, and I said, I'm not going to Sunday school anymore. I don't resonate with what they're trying to teach me. I just had a greater awareness of us and God and everything else. So I didn't really, it didn't resonate with me. So where am I going with this? Okay. So having these experiences, and then one day, this is where it really all started. I was in my 20s. We did a lot of horseback hunting in the mountains. So there was 5 of us. We had a backpack. We had 8 horses. We were about a day and a half hiking with the horses, hunting in this valley called Tavass Flats. And it was a full moon in August, the end of August, full moon. And it was archery season for elk, and sheep had just opened up top. So we just packed in and we set up our wall tent, and we're all laying in there in bed. And there's 5 of us. There's a doctor from Stony Plain, my brother's friend, a friend of mine, my brother, and myself. And the one fella hears something, and he says, "Did you guys hear that? There's something calling way off in the distance." And I'm like, none of us heard it. He heard it twice before any of us. So he said, "Did you guys hear it that time?" And we're like, "No, man." So the 3rd time, I definitely heard something way, way down in the valley. And I'm like, "Whoa, man, that was deep. Like, that was a big creature, whatever it was." I heard it, and I'm like, "Okay, so let's get up." So me and him got up, and we went outside, and I grabbed my elk bugle. And at this point, I've been a guide for quite a few years, and I'm very aware of all the wildlife and what they sound like. So this creature called from way down the valley, and it was an unbelievably loud call, and it was so far away. So I grabbed my elk bugle, and I just scream at him. And boom, it answers right away. So we're like, okay, there's and it's full moon, so you can see everything. So at first, I guess I thought it was an elk. I said, okay, this creature's coming. And what had happened was it covered ground so fast that no animal can cover ground that fast. It was so far away. And then I called again, and the next thing you know, it's like split that difference in half, which would have been maybe half a mile or something, but it happened just like that, like within maybe a minute or something. And so it really raised my awareness right away. At this point, everybody came outside, and then I called. So on the 3rd call that we all heard it, I bugled, and this thing mimicked my call to the T, and then it would sound like an elephant, it would sound like a zebra, and then it would finish the call with and the leaves would shake. So after the 3rd call, everybody looked at me. I said, "Eric, what the fuck is that?" I looked at them, and I said, "That's a Bigfoot." And they all lost it. They all lost it. We actually all were very, very, we were all very, the hair was standing up, everybody was on edge. So what happened is everybody grabbed their guns. Everybody grabbed their guns and they loaded them. I mean, they thought it was a huge grizzly bear or something coming. None of them believed in Bigfoot. And at this point, I already had a connection with Bigfoot. And I already knew that, that they're amazing forest people, and, they're out here. Because I continued having experiences. So it started coming in, and I would call at it, and this thing would mimic my calls to the T. I would bugle, and then I would cow call, and it's like the most amazing ventriloquist you could imagine. It would mimic my calls to the T, and then it would go on to these series of calls, and the calls were so loud that no animal in North America has lungs this loud. Like, there's nothing that could do it. I've been, this far away from bugling bull elk and grunting bull moose, many times, and they don't have this type of vocal cord. So as it got closer, I was feeling very calm about it, and I just told the guys, I said, "You guys, put your guns down." I said, "I'm not getting any negative energy from this thing. It's coming in, we're safe, there's 5 of us, we got 8 horses here, like, we're okay, put your guns down." So everybody put their guns down, and this creature came up to our camp, and we're in this big meadow, and it came up, and it actually walked. We could physically hear it walking. As it got closer, it quit calling, but we heard it walk through the edge of the meadow, and it stayed right there at the face, and it was totally watching us. We couldn't see it. And then it walked off, and that was it. And I was so amazed. I was like, there was 100% certainty that this was a Sasquatch and that it had come. So it was full moon, and it had come. At that point, I thought it had come. It was like breeding season. I had all these things going through my mind, like it's coming to look for a mate or something like that. But it actually came every time we have experiences. This is my understanding. So a lot of these teachings and understandings resonate and they're true for me. It doesn't mean that they're going to be for everybody. But so what I knew is that this Sasquatch had come. Eventually, I learned that he had come to bring his medicine to us and teach us what he had to teach us. So at this point, I had no idea that there was a community out there. So I was like spiritually connected to the Sasquatch, and I knew that I wanted to go back and experience more of the Sasquatch. So I planned a trip the next spring to come back here in the spring and backpacking and head into this valley where I figured the Sasquatch came out. So I was telepathing to him like 2 weeks prior, and I had prepared, and I was preparing spiritually for this journey. And 2 weeks prior, I was just sending him messages from Edmonton to the Rocky Mountains saying, you know, I'm coming up to this area, I'm coming to learn, I'm coming to meet you guys and to understand what this means. So a lot of these stories are a lot more detailed than actually what I'm going to be able to share. I just don't know if I have enough time. So anyways, as I come up to this place, and it's springtime, the floods have just came down, everything's greening up, and I start hiking in up this trail called the Cowlick Trail, and it's very well used in the fall and in hunting season for sheep hunters. But in the spring, nobody goes in there. This is in a park called Wilmore Wilderness Area. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. So there's no quads, there's no ATVs, it's like foot, horseback, or pedal bike. So I just start off into the trail, and I get a kilometer up, and the whole series of events happened. First event was something brown was coming down the trail. I seen a glimpse of it. I thought it was a deer. Turned out to be a cougar. A mama cougar comes around the corner with 4 young babies. They're yearling cougar cubs. Wow. They're about the size of a German Shorthair Pointer. And she came out to about here to that table, not very far. As soon as she came out, boom, she takes off. And all the cubs followed her except one, and that one cub just sat in the corner and looked at me, and I'm like, and I had no fear, you know, I was like in the prime of my life, and I knew that they weren't coming to attack me, I had no fear. So I actually had my bear spray in my backpack, so I'm like, okay, well, I'll stop. The cougar looked at me, and then he disappeared into the woods. I take my backpack off and say, I better get my bear spray out. And I hear him rustling, and he comes up to 1 truck length away from me. He came up to where Bo was, this far, and I'm not lying on any of my stories. So he came up and he came out onto the trail, and he's looking at me, and I have my bear spray here, and I'm looking at him, and he doesn't know what to do. I can tell he's a male from his energy, and he's a good size. Like he would have, you know, he didn't know what to do. He's looking at me, and he's like, "Why aren't you running? Should I attack you?" But he didn't know what I was, so he actually ended up sitting down right there, a truck length away, and I'm like, this is pretty cool. No one's going to believe this. I got to take a photo of it. So I reach into my backpack, and I'm shuffling around to get my camera. It's like a big camera that's packed in there. At this point, he went back into the forest, and he came back out on the corner of that trail. So now I got my camera with a big zoom, and I'm taking photos of him as his, what I thought was his sister, came down. So now there's 2 cougars there at like 30 yards away, and I get some photos of them, and the whole time Mama's up the hill chirping like a bird trying to get him to follow. So anyways, I end up following them up the trail. I get a bunch more photos of them. I get a little bit farther down the trail, and I smell skunk. And from doing some research that I was online trying to find experiencers, sometimes they say that they would smell like a skunk. So I'm like, maybe this is a female Sasquatch. And I just start talking to her through my mind, like, thank you for your presence. And that was it. I just kept hiking up the trail. I had an 8-hour hike in to where I wanted to go. It ended up taking me 8 hours, I guess, to get to my first location. And then so I'm like, okay, maybe there's a skunk in the mountains. I don't know. I've never seen a skunk in the mountains, and I've been there quite a bit. But then I got about another hour up the hike, and I smelled skunk again. And I'm like, okay, now this is a bit of a coincidence. What's the chances of running into 2 skunks up in the mountains? And I get a little bit farther. I smelled it 3 times on the way in. And then, I'm just going to kind of shorten this up, but I found some big nook shooks. I get up to this place and I go down to the creek, and then all of a sudden, where the flood that just came through, there's this beautiful nook shook, which I guess I call them nook shook, but it's like a rock person. Somebody created with rocks, and there's this beautiful big rock person with 2 arms, and there was 3 little ones on one of the arms. So I intuitively thought that the Sasquatch made this, and it seemed to be like a female with 3 little babies on here. So I'm like, cool. To me, this was all medicine at this point. I knew that this was amazing interactions that was happening for a reason. So I continue on down, and I finally get to my destination. It was a big, long hike in, and I had a heavy pack, and I was beat. I was spent. Just came off the winter. I wasn't really in shape. So, anyways, I'm down there, and I started milling around. I was down there for 3 days, milling around, and I went to another spot down by the river, and this is where nobody should ever be. And I found a big, huge male nook shook. What I figured was a male. It was a big one, and it was actually had a circle of rocks around it. It was kind of like almost in the middle of a medicine wheel. And then that night, I'm in camp, and I'm just camped in this little meadow, and I look up in space, and a huge spaceship flies over. Wow. Huge ball of light just flies over the meadow, and I'm like, wow, this is so amazing. Anyways, so I spent a few days in there, and I left, and on the way out, I crossed the river where that first big rock structure was, and I get up on top of the bank. I know this is a horse trail, there's no place to veer off or anything like that. I come back up on top, and there's a huge 50-inch, just imagine a 50-inch bull moose. There's a huge moose shed sitting right in the middle of the trail. And I couldn't have missed this moose shed. And a moose shed is really big and heavy, so I pick it up, and I'm like, right away I knew it was a gift from the Sasquatch. I pick it up, and it smells like wet dog. It smells like, if you could imagine this inside of a wolf den of that smell of wet dog, it smelled horrible. And I'm like, I look at it, and I'm looking for teeth marks, because only a grizzly bear or a wolf would have been able to move that. And it was so heavy, it would have left teeth marks on there. There's no teeth marks on this moose shed. So I pick it up, I acknowledge that it was a gift from them, and I left them an apple. I strapped it to my backpack, and I hiked out. So, the series of events after that, so at that point I had no community who really understood. I didn't know that there was a community out there of people who had spiritual connection to the Sasquatch. And I'm frantically trying to find